nice to have you guys here today. I don't feel like I don't need to introduce myself. I know most of you, but my name is Victoria. I'm the curator here at the Vernon Public Art Gallery. Thank you so much for joining us on a beautiful Saturday afternoon. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered today on the unceded traditional territory of the Okanagan Silks people. And I extend my gratitude for the opportunity to live, work, and share art on this land. It's my pleasure to introduce today's artist, Amy J. Dyck, who's joining us from Langley, BC, who's made a few trips here now, so I really appreciate that.
I'm used to it.
Yeah. Amy is a multidisciplinary artist whose practice moves fluidly between painting and sculpture and drawing and collage. I like to describe her as fearless when it comes to art making because I'm envious of how you just cross these territories effortlessly. Her work explores transformation, hybridity, and the porous boundaries between interior and exterior worlds. In her exhibition, Portals to Elsewhere, which we're surrounded by today, she invites us into spaces that feel at once familiar and otherworldly, where windows, thresholds, and shifting figures open into moments of uncertainty, imagination, and possibility. We're very grateful to have her here with us today to share more about her work and her process. Today's talk will run approximately 45 minutes, and we'll have roughly 15-ish minutes for questions at the end. I do want to mention that we do have catalogs available in the gift shop.
And there's some really beautiful essays in there.
There's some great essays.
They're just so lovely, and you should read them and buy them.
So if you want to spend some more time with the work after we spend some time with Amy, feel free to pick up one of these.
Yes.
And just join me in welcoming Amy. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I love these events so much, so I'm just so grateful to have people come out and care about the thing that I care about so much. So it's always a surprise, you know, and like, oh, you want to know about what I'm doing? Really? Okay. So I'll start here. This talk is going to be called, I'm calling it Iterations and Evolution. It's really just about my process, how I started with the process, how I kind of fell into the process that I have now for making work, and why I sort of ended up there in the first place. I will be referring to my phone a lot, so I'm not texting. This is where my notes are. So I'll start off by, first of all, so it's about my process, but it's also about how my process changed after illness. And so I'm going to just really briefly address the illness, which is got me in the wheelchair, just because I don't love talking about it, but it is actually all the work here that is in this exhibit comes out of my relationship with my body and with what's happening to me. So it's sort of, it's integral to the process. So I'll just sort of address it briefly for context, and then we'll just get into the work and how I started making work the way that I make it. So I have a complex chronic illness. It has a couple of names. They're hard to pronounce, so I don't bother. But I have a dynamic disability, which is basically like living in a, what are those called, a wave pool. So I'm always in the wave pool, but the waves come and they go and they come and they go. So I have to always be adapting. So when the wave is really big and strong, I'm sort of in my bed and I'm resting and I'm recovering. And then when the wave comes down, I try to get some things done if I can, make more art in the studio. And so it affects my entire studio practice because I make all these different sorts of ways of making, but it, you know, on a good day, I'll be using clay in the studio, and on a rough day, I might be drawing in bed. You know, so it's kind of part of the reason that I use so many mediums is because I switch between waves, we'll say. Let's see. So I've had it my entire adult life, but it's escalated about 8 years ago, and so all this work that's here came when I got that really big wave illness. It started from there and it transitioned. So I'm going to show you really briefly what I was making before, and then we'll talk about how I moved into this work. And then we'll move on to the slides. So this is, I've got a couple of slides of some pieces that I was making before. I was focusing a lot on the relationship we have with ourselves. So the blue figures are representing the internal self, the psyche, the kind of dynamic we have with ourselves that I always find fascinating. I think I have a lot of tension with myself as far as, you know, part of you wants the cake and part of you knows you'll feel sick. So that's sort of a little tension between, or how people see us and maybe how we, you know, actually feel. There's a bit of that sort of difference. So I spent a lot of time caring about that. But it was all about, there's a lot of realism in my work. It was very much old master techniques, very careful, meticulous, refined. And I found over time the process was kind of structural, rigid, but it was perfect for, if you knew what you wanted to do, you could follow the steps and get there. It was fantastic for that. But what I noticed over time is that there wasn't really much room for discovery in my process. So even though I really loved making these works, I found at some point they started to feel a little, they just weren't as aligned with the part of me that needed to kind of explore and express over time. And then in 2017, I got really sick, and my life and my body became this sort of chaotic, unpredictable place. I was in the wheelchair for the first time, and I ended up having to get this. I was waiting for a diagnosis, so it was really hard and scary for a while, and it was followed by some brutal and expensive regimes, so like treatment regimes, and so everything just sort of shrunk down to a really, really small place. I had work, I had my family, and I had bed. There wasn't really much room for anything else. At the time, I was really devastated at losing my mobility, and I started to need to find a way to express what I was going through. Art for me it feels like it's my voice, like it feels like my first language. And so this slide here, I jumped a little bit soon, but this is what happened when I started to, what I did actually is I found a mentor who made really wild creative work and really expressive, strange work. And I said, okay, I need to know how you do what you do. Can you help me figure out? Because I knew that my work was really refined and careful and beautiful before, but my life felt chaotic and broken and stressful, and I needed my work to reflect my art to reflect my experience. So I took a little program. I signed up for like a 6-month sort of program with him, which is really funny because I was really sick at the time, so I don't think doctors would have thought that was a good idea. But I joined, just every 3 weeks we'd show up in his studio, and he taught me, he introduced me to collage. And that's one of the things that he did for me was showing me how to use collage in this way that it just opened up my whole world when I did that. So, 1 second here. So yeah, my life was really disrupted. So I started to play with disrupting imagery with collage. And what I love about collage is that it's so immediate. You can just take, a symbol of a figure and a symbol of, I don't know, an axe, and all of a sudden you have like an association with the two. And you can take a figure and you can have a blanket and you have a totally different association with the two. And I love that you can just do that in an instant, and you start to develop. I started to develop by practicing over and over again a bit of what's the word I'm looking for? Like a language through just learning how to find, like just building up that sort of gut response that I hadn't had access to before. So let's see. So I started noticing that over time I do more and more collages. I was still playing with the relationship dynamic with myself. I found that really interesting still. That you can see a lot of these two figures in my work still, but it was very much more jarring, more ripped up, more kind of colorful. And at this time, I learned how to trust my body's reaction to my collages, even before I really understood what I was doing. So I started for the first time to just learn what intuition felt like. How do I follow it? What does it mean? Can I make a mess? I made a lot of terrible art. I promise you, I promise you, it was terrible. And then I had a few ones that were just not terrible, and it was just so exciting because for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was making work that really felt honest. It felt alive and it felt honest, and it was as if they were these characters and creatures that I was experiencing were like living my reality for the first time, and that was really exciting for me. I'm just making sure that my slides, I haven't zoomed ahead too much. Right, here I am. So this one is the first slide that has a piece from the show in it. So this program that I took, it was just really a chance for him to mentor us and push us out of our comfort zones. And so I was still making lots of like really weird, ugly collages, like the one on the left. But there was something in it that I found kind of fun. And he pushed us to try to then paint our collages. So it was the first time that I'd made a piece and then tried to make pieces from the pieces that I was making. And So I took that sort of messy, cut out, ugly thing, and I turned it into that painting that's in the middle there. And I was trying to take some of that wild, expressive, curious energy from the collages, that sort of impulsive energy from collages, and insert it into my paintings. And then I took that one and then I made a portrait from it, which isn't in the show, but that's sort of me, the first time I started working in iterations of a piece to see if I could like distill it down or to find like different pathways to wander through the work. I was trying to keep it experimental and open, not being locked in with the rigid processes that I was used to. I borrowed aspects of realism because it's the one thing that I think whenever I let go of realism, I just felt lost. So I found that if I held on to moments of realism, I felt connected to the work. But then if I let go of it in other parts, it felt like there was something that felt more aligned with my experience. So that was the first time I really started playing with that. I was playing with abstraction a little bit, with expressive marks, and working with iterations. Then, oh yeah, that's just another one. There's a digital collage on the left, which, doesn't look like a masterpiece or anything. And then I just took it and made it into something on the right, which just ended up being this sort of fun, playful piece in the end that I just really enjoyed. So that's just the start of collage. So after that little program, I ended up shifting my entire art practice into basically a collage-based practice. And so I started making a whole bunch of these little collages. There's some on the back wall there. I've probably made, I don't know, 40 or 50 of them maybe by this point. And I started just, let me just find my notes here. I found myself just resorting to these like really quick, really layered pieces. And my interest in the human body had shifted, and the self-relationship had shifted into more about nuance. And I think the nuance of the relationship with ourselves, I was finding it was a very specific time, actually. It was 2 years after I'd taken that little program. And I was showing up to school in my wheelchair, picking up my kids from school, and people were wonderful, but they often forgot that they often asked me how I was doing, but for about 2 years, the only conversation I had was how sick I was. And it was really difficult because I think it's really easy for people to forget when something is really obvious about somebody, a difference of some sort. They kind of forget that there's other parts of us that are also in existence. And so that happened. And then at the same time, because I had an obvious disability, people would come up to me and share with me their stories about when they were disabled, or when they almost died, or when they were struck by lightning. True. I have a friend who's struck by lightning. He could only see out of black and white, I think, out of one eye for like 6 months. It's just kind of wild. But I started getting all these stories from my friends and peers and people I didn't know very well that sort of broadened my view of who they were and sort of unflattened them in a way. So this work here that I started to make was really about the complexity of who we are, how many layers are actually there with people. And they're all self-portraits, but they're all sort of this sort of rebellion against our tendency to flatten people to what we just see on the surface. So all of these pieces here have become actually the foundation for pretty much everything in this exhibit here. I'll show you more about that when I get there. So here is one of the pieces. Now this one isn't in the show, but there's an iteration of this in the show. So if you've seen that little area over there, and I'll get to that piece in here as well, you'll see that I started off with this collage on the left, which is about this big here. And then I turned it into this sort of collaged oil painting. That was sort of another thing that happened actually around this time, is I started getting really curious what would happen if I just did certain things, and I started letting myself ask myself the question, well, what happens if I don't know, collage an oil painting? Let's just find out. So I started just trying stuff to see what would happen. And every piece that I make usually starts off with a question. What happens if I don't know, make the whole painting blue? What happens if I only use, I don't know, wax paint? What happens if, and I just kind of keep going and going and going. And it's a lot of fun to do it that way. So this is just a little example of the painting, and then the collage I used for the painting, and then some of the pieces that I used to cut up to make into a collaged oil painting. And then eventually I'll show you where it turns into another piece down the line. And so, yes, and you've seen this one as well. So I talked about the ebbs and flows of sort of the tidal pool that not tidal pool, the wave pool that I live in. Tidal pool would be nice and peaceful. I think I could live with that, but a wave pool. So I was noticing as I was getting stronger for a while, and I really missed painting a lot. I missed the scale of it. The collages are usually about this big because they're based on little photos that I've taken or magazines. And I missed the scale of painting, and I missed the physicality of painting. And it was also just my strongest skill. It was the thing that I learned. The reason I fell in love with art in the first place was oil painting. So I decided to get back into it and try to interpret some of my collages as painting. So this is one of the loosest interpretations that I have, where this collage here is, this piece here is called Chaos and Order, and this was basically, I don't remember what it's called, but it's along the same lines, but it's really this about that yearning for control and trying to keep everything together, trying to amass and collect, and all these hands are trying to hold things up. So the one on the right, if you look very carefully, you can see some parts. Her arm here is still here. This sort of weird shadow turned into a little monster on the right. I've got this sort of, this shape here is behind her. Even the arms down here are the same, but then I took it and just sort of built on it. And it was the first time that I have a painting with a window in it. And it was the first time out of many that it started to emerge. And it's funny because I'm a really like systematic person in some ways, and sort of logical and reasonable. So I'm not the sort of person that I would think would say something like, oh, it just needed to be there, or oh, the monster just showed up, as if I didn't paint it there with my own hands. But there's something about the process of the way that I've been working with collage first, which lets it be really intuitive, and then just letting myself scribble and play, that has allowed these sort of shapes and suggestions to start kind of emerging on their own in a way. And so it's been really fun to just lean into the intuition and see what pops up. And I'll talk about that some more. So on the theme of motifs, over time, the longer that I worked, the more certain forms kept emerging, and they kept returning over and over. If you look around the room, you'll be able to see repetitions of motifs that have popped up from, there's some monsters that show up. There's lots of little scorpion tails that show up. Hi, guys. There's lots of wings that show up. You'll see things that, if you look around, there'll be themes that kind of pop up, and they mostly popped up through collage first, and then they grew from there. So there's wrapped arms that popped up a lot, animal parts, wheels, insects, and then one of the themes that showed up especially a lot were these windows or portals, which is where the title of the show came from in the first place. There we go. So I didn't really understand what I was doing at first. I just kept following the lead of my curiosity and my inner yes, or my inner, oh, that's fun, or that's interesting. And if I trusted that, then something started to emerge that over time developed into a bit of a visual language. Then what happened? So these collages, again, are still part of are still a foundation of my practice. But I decided I wanted to know what would happen if I took these collages and these wild and strange creatures, and I put them in the real world, like as if in the natural world, as if, in streams and mountains and that sort of thing. So I've got one here, and there's a few of them. Where are they? They're right behind the screen. So I did that with a few pieces where I took my collages and I put them in the real world, and I wanted to know what would happen. It was really a little bit of a social experiment, I think, for myself. I think I was curious, or I'm still curious, what happens when we bring difference into the real world. Like, can the world accept this? Can everybody embrace difference? Can everybody embrace when we see chaos in others, when we see difference in others, when we see dependence in others? Can we tolerate that, or do they belong in the world with the rest of us? I think it's sort of me kind of wrestling with these sort of ideas and ableist ideas that sort of are ingrained in our society. So I sort of stuck these sort of strange and wild creatures in the world to see what would happen, and I kind of like them. Nobody told me to rip them out, so they're still there. And in some ways, in a lot of ways, it isn't just about them. Of course, it's about me, right? It's about me trying to figure out whether the world can fit, can handle difference in people like me, because my work is very personal. So that's where that came from. And then then I decided that I would push it further. So instead of just having these paintings of collaged figures and sticking them in like landscapes and things, I decided to actually try playing with dimensional form for the first time and actually learn how to make pieces that took up space in the real physical world where we could all move around them. I just really wanted to know what it would be like to circle around these sort of oddities, these odd creatures, and see what would happen if they're just kind of beside us. You know, how could people accept them? Could they roll with it? Would they find it interesting? Would they be repulsed by it? I didn't know, so I wanted to find out. So this was the start of it. These are layers. So there's I started off with still collage as a foundation, where I played with plywood and I layered them over each other first of all, and I added things like feathers and things. So there's the start of dimensional form is popping up here. And let me just see, I'm going to make sure I'm keeping up. Sorry about that, guys. I think I've either gone too fast or too slow, but it's probably okay. Here we are. So this is my next attempt. So I was playing again with collage, but I was the collage on the left turned into the piece on the right. I had to learn how to do upholstery. That was different. I think I learned how to do a lot of things just well enough to get by, but I'm not an expert at any of them. I just sort of figured out enough through YouTube videos. But that was sort of another version of this sort of strange, wild creature that I wanted to bring into the real world and see what would happen. A fun little quirk about this piece is that the little rabbit in here is our pet rabbit. She's her name is Muffin. She's a little, like a fluffy little rascal, and likes to stomp at me when she's mad. But I put her in there because to me the rabbit is really just a little nervous system running around. She's either on fight, flight, or freeze, or she's just resting and eating at any given time. So she's either, you know, switching between one or the other. And I put her in here to represent the nervous system of this creature in here. So that's sort of her place. And then I decided to push it into even more sculpture. So I started off playing with collage on the left. Oh, funny, my mouse is there, but not here. Oh, it is here. It's just me. So I've got the piece on the left, so I'm playing with that. I turned it into a collage. And then I thought, well, that'd be really fun to turn this into a sculpture. And so I ended up making this, which is the piece right here. And some people have asked me why I started with woodworking. And I think it's a very fair question, because a lot of the times woodworking takes a lot of strength and I don't have a lot of strength. So it's one I have to choose based on how I'm doing. But I chose wood first because my husband is a woodworker, and I believe really strongly in using what's available to you. I think artists, a lot of the times we feel like we have to do, you know, very specific things, like we have to get into ceramics or we have to get into metalwork or whatever, but we don't have access, so we don't do it. And so I had access to a wood shop, and I had access to his brain. And even now I'll start something, I'll plan it out, I'll cut it up, and then I'll say, all right, I need to attach this to this. And he'll say to me, you should have thought of that before. And I'm like, cool, can you fix it? And he says, okay. And so he'll come up with some like whole system to like rabbit it in and make sure it actually works. He had just saved me so many times. Anytime there's wood in something, I will make it, and I'll just start, because I don't know what else to do. I'll just start kind of going, and then I'll say, okay, help me make this stick together, because I obviously don't know how to do that part. So he'll just come and he'll just build some structure inside to make it all lock together and then make it seamless. And you can't even see what he did, but he's actually quite a big help in my practice. So I started with wood because I had access to a carpenter, basically, and a shop. And now I have my own tools, so that's fun. There's many ways to break into sculpture. I started with what I had. So then I want to talk a little bit about the portals and the windows, which is a theme of this exhibit here. I noticed that it sort of started to occur because, again, I work from collage, so I work with a lot of suggestion to myself. Like I just sort of introduce ideas and shapes and stuff to myself and see what I think, and then if I like it, I keep it, and if I don't, I don't. I noticed over time, specifically when I had a really bad wave of illness in 2017, I had a lot of windows popping up in my collages, a lot of portals, a lot of shapes. And then again, when I had another disabling wave in 2022, I had a lot of them coming up. And I started to get really curious why they needed to be there in the first place. Like, what is it that I needed? What did they represent for me? And in truth, I spent a lot of time during those waves of illness in my bed looking out my window outside. And out my window, I could see, the squirrels running around and the birds running around and getting the bugs from the earth. I could see people driving to and from work. I could see the grasses blowing in the wind. I could see the trees. And it ended up being this sort of strange portal into the outside world for me, just where I felt like I could be in my bedroom, but I could also sort of be outside a little bit at the same time. It could sort of, is a bit of a bridge to somewhere else at the same time. And then so it represented this sort of connection to the world, my longing to be in the world. And then I noticed over time, they ended up being connections, I think, to other places for my characters as well. I had them, these sort of windows and portals, taking them to other spots that maybe they wanted to go to, or maybe they wanted to imagine, or like even like the fantasy, they started to represent this sort of this fantasy where they could sort of be somewhere else at the same time as they were where they were. So that's, I just ended up just kind of rolling with it because I just felt like I have so many. I would love to count how many of these pieces have that I've made that actually have that many in it, but there's a lot of them. I wanted to talk about, there's a few paintings that have them in there. There's a little fly on the windowsill. So, actually, the model for this here isn't in the audience today, but I won't point her out because I don't know whether she wants everyone to know that she's a monster in my piece. You know I love you if I've made you into a monster in one of my paintings. I'm just letting you know. Okay, this is this piece here. These are a couple pieces actually, are the Peace Offering series. I've got 3 of them, but I could only fit 2 in the slide. So these 2 windows are actually my bedroom window that I painted from while I was there. And I wanted to mention these pieces specifically because I'm still really interested in the relationship we have with ourselves as a foundation for my art practice. But I was noticing with myself a lot of anger and frustration at my body, at my circumstances, and I was processing a lot for a while. And so when I made these 3 pieces, the 2 here and the other on the wall, I was trying to reconcile, to come to peace with myself, maybe to be less angry with myself at my own limits, things that I can't control. So I imagine these sort of like peace offerings that I was offering to myself, that, part of me was sort of offering, trying to kind of come to terms with, let's be friends, and then I think the cynical part of me just imagined them being like really like broken little objects, like, dead flowers or a broken necklace or that sort of thing. But it reminded me also of the sorts of gifts my daughter used to give me when she was little. She would just find delight in everything, like little wrappers of things and half dead flowers, and she would give them all away. And so there's a sort of a dynamic that I jumped in on for these pieces here. It was really about that sort of trying to come to peace with myself or come to terms with what was happening and get along, I guess. even if the peace offerings weren't, expensive, valuable things. They were just sort of inherently a little old or broken. And then I wanted to talk about the bed desk series. So I've got a series in the back there and sort of a little portal-y, windowy spot by itself. And when you walk into it, I've purposely domed the drawings because partly to create the space, but partly because when you stand back and they're a little bit domed, they get distorted. You can't quite see them clearly. But what I really liked about that is that when you walk up to them and you get close to them, they sort of flatten out and you can see what's happening better. And it reminded me a lot of empathy and difference, and how it's really easy to judge people from a distance, but when we get close to them, it's a lot easier to see them clearly and harder to it's easier to see them much more clearly and honestly and empathetically. So I created these sort of wild, strange creatures in here, which I'll talk about, but I made them so that they would invite you to come close and see them in the process. So I had one big massive wave of illness that had me in bed for about 6 months. and it proved really, really hard to make art. So I wasn't making art the whole time. I'm not a superhero, but I did have I did get really I really missed my art for a while. And every time I get really sick, my husband builds me something else to make it easier. So or buys me something to make it easier. So this time he built me this bed desk. And he decided that it would be a lot easier just to bring the art to me from my studio. So he set up this bed desk, and we found some paper, and if I folded it just right, it would fit in this very specific window of, I think, like 11 inches by 30 or something very specific. And so I said, that's my challenge to myself. I have this very specific window to work from, and I'm going to see what I can make. And the complicated thing is that I had an exhibit coming up, and I had all the show coming up, ready for the exhibit, except for the installation, which is usually, installations are usually physical big things that take up space, right? So usually you have to be able to move to be able to make these big things. But I found that I couldn't do it. So I decided just to do what I could. So I decided to sit down and start drawing. And what I found that I wanted to do was to make my figures move in the way that I couldn't. So I started to live through, like, vicariously through these drawings by having them sort of move and evolve and change and grow. And it was really just trying to vicariously remember what it felt like to have that option. And so I was using, now this drawing is not in this collection. It was in this collection, but it is sold at one of the shows, so I don't have it anymore. But I wanted to show how I was using these collages still that I have as the foundation of my practice to create these bed desk series pieces as well. So I have a collage, and then I imagined how she could be moving or growing or changing or transitioning through her sequence, I guess. I like how they're sort of like a storyboard, this piece here, which I mentioned earlier or showed you earlier, is a collage. It turned into this painting, and then I took the painting and started using myself as I actually, you'll see my face all over this entire exhibit, and my legs and my arms. So I take myself and I started to on Procreate play with the different arrangements and how I could make it rotate through these scribbles and messes. I overlaid my legs and my arms and my hands and my face onto it, and then I ended up with this drawing here at the end. And so you can see how I actually found photography is a huge part of my my practice. So just mostly just photographing myself really in different ways, and then obscuring it or messing it up in some way. Okay, next. I think I already mentioned that one. Right, so I just mentioned the curved ones. I wanted to invite people close to these, to the strange beings, because I think it encourages curiosity and kindness. There we go. And then, right, so this piece almost made it an exhibit. We didn't end up having space, but it was just another example of, I'll show you because actually it's part of my process. I started making all these little collages here at my bed desk. They're quite little, so I could just sort of assemble these little creatures, and then I could rest and assemble and rest, and so I could do them in like half an hour or something like that. And then I eventually made a big collage out of them. And then I took this collage here and I started pulling the pieces from here as to make the bed desk series, one of the pieces from that installation over there. So really, I find that I tend to make pieces, and then I make an iteration of them, and another iteration of them, and another iteration of them, and it kind of is really fun to see where they end up going in the end. There's another one here. This one actually sold as well, which is not in the exhibit, but it was originally part of that series, and it came also from this piece here. This painting is also gone, but this painting is a piece that I made, and you can see that I borrowed this figure from the left, and I brought her into this piece on the right called Mothering, where I imagined her sort of evolving from this sort of slug-like creature in the beginning, with all these little creatures sort of climbing up on her back, and then her kind of finding her strength over time and figuring out how to carry these creatures, or you can call them burdens, or you could call them, parts of her in a sense, carry them forward with dignity and strength. So this is sort of how I imagined that one, and it started off with a painting, which probably started off as a collage, if I'm honest with you. This is the process of making this. My husband built the structure over there. So this is some of the sketches that went into when we were planning what this would look like, or brainstorming how would we build it, what would look the best, could we hang it from the ceiling. Then he built it for me. Here we got a grant from Canada Council for the Arts to actually build the structure and structures, I guess. And there they are right there. Then I wanted to show you the process of, let's see. I think I'm here, but I'll just start talking. So basically, like I mentioned, I do a lot of, my life is a very flexible thing, and I'm always sort of taking temperature of what's happening, how it's going, how my body's doing, and then I gauge my life, my art choices, everything according to what's happening that minute or that hour or that day. So this is a lot of some photos of what I was doing when I was working from bed. So a lot of these soft sculptures here, and you'll see them along the wall. They pretty much were all made in bed when I was having more bed rest. This is an old feather duster I got off Marketplace, and I took apart, and now it's a sculpture in the back. That was a little dusty. I had to really shake that out to get that thing clean. And then when I started to do better, I went into the wood shop. This is my husband screwing. This is him rescuing me again. I cut out the shape, and I said, I need this to stick together. He says, well, if I'd known that, but now, okay, fine, I'll build you this bracing. So he built me this little bracing system for it, and then I brought it back into my bed, and I started working with the soft sculptures to build this piece here. Yeah, I did zoom ahead. That's fine. So I have this piece here with all these arms that I'm wrapping around. I'm just testing my theory to see whether it'll work. This is me testing it here with the start of this wing painting that I had made. And this wing actually, speaking of my husband, he found this dead owl on the side of the road for me. It's so kind, the gifts I get from my husband. He was driving by and he called me. He said, I don't know if you want this, but I just drove by this dead owl and it looked like it was just killed. Do you want me to grab that? And I said, actually, kind of, yes. Would you do that for me? So he went and got it. And I had to learn taxidermy after that because you can't keep a dead owl, right? So I brought the owl home. I put it in the freezer at first because I just wasn't quite sure. I thawed it, and then I had to do some Googling, and I learned how to, I won't get graphic on you. It was kind of gross, but I had to learn how to disconnect parts and dip it in borax and pin it up. And so this is the owl wing that I have. I actually have a whole collection of bird wings in my studio now. People, once the word gets out, they start saying, by the way, my dog caught a flicker. Do you want the bird? Or a hummingbird just ran into my window. Do you want my hummingbird? And so I still have birds in my freezer. This is from years back. And I joke that I've got, like dead birds beside the blueberries in my freezer, but they probably are. There are some still there. So I know I gotta get those out of there. I think there's a hawk in there somewhere. Anyway, so at some point, I eventually, I've been dying to learn ceramics, and it's not a thing that I ever had access to, or I wasn't around people with kilns. I didn't know how to do it. But what I ended up doing is I found a community class, because I just wanted to know what would happen if I started playing with clay. Could I make these things feel a little bit more alive? What would be kind of fun? But I know if I started, they might blow up. I'd heard that things blow up in kilns. So I thought, okay, I better go take at least a class and figure out how to do it without having things explode. So I ended up taking a workshop. That's how I learned how to make the face for this piece. It was just a basic community class, like a sculpture class of some sort. So I said, all right, I'm going to make a face. I'm going to try to build this wing head piece. And that's sort of how I pieced this whole thing together. I learned sculpture for it. And oops, how do I go back? I forget. Let's try. Speaking of fearless, there we go. Yeah, so that's how I learned sculpture for this piece. And then ever since then, I just loved it. I fell in love with it so much. I love the tactility of it. I love how I can make it look really fleshy, even though it's stone. I love that contradiction. So I started I bought some clay and I started building from home. And so a lot of the other pieces you'll find in here are some of the things I've started to build for my house. I don't have a kiln, so I know people. Here's a little note. I'm almost done. This is a little note on process. This piece here is called, okay, let's see if I can say this one. It's a collage. I don't know whether it's here. It might be on the wall, but it's based, the painting back there is based on this collage. And this collage is based on those paintings by artists that were not me. One is, I think it's Kyotada is how you say it, and Cezanne. And I liked the sort of conversation between their pieces and me at the same time. And we could have this sort of visual art conversation between us. So I called it the conversation. And I just sort of, I disassembled they call it the dancer right here on the right. And I cut it apart and I made my own little creature out of it. I liked the sort of warrior imagery that was there, and I was trying to kind of maintain a bit of that sort of power and strength in this creature that I built. And I took the mountain and stuck it in the window from Cezanne there, and then I made this piece, and I love it. It's this fun little piece, and it's sort of my way of interacting with artists of the past. And this is just another little glimpse of process. So sometimes I don't know what to do with things like color, for example. Like it's one of the things I'm most insecure about is my ability to solve color dilemmas, even though, you know, I do know a lot, but I know there's so much nuance to it. So sometimes what I do is I borrow artworks that I love, and I'll just sort of borrow the color schemes and see what happens. This is just a little glimpse into, I forget who the artists were, so I apologize. I couldn't find them in time for this, but I borrowed these artworks that I loved, and I just took a dropper and I popped the colors into my little digital format to see what would happen if I took the ratios that they used and the colors they used in this piece that I wanted to make it into a painting. And I tried out several different versions to see what I thought of them and how it felt. And then I ended up just painting it the way I did, which was sort of a variation of one, but I worked with it a little bit. This is an underpainting of it, so I kind of scribbled the drawing on first, and then there's the final piece on the wall, which you have there. And is that it? Yes. Okay, so in summary, my work has changed drastically in 8 years. It's in response to the circumstances. My work no longer starts already figured out. Now it starts with a question: what happens if? And then I figure out what I want to insert into that question and just have a lot of fun. I let go of a clear path. I let go of perfection. I let go of needing a specific result when I made the work, and I started embracing process, presence, curiosity, and play. And it's made my practice really alive to me. It's made me feel really, really alive and really engaged with the practice. Just being able to approach it that way. And I think I needed that. I think with going through what I went through, I needed to be able to have my art practice not be so serious. I needed it to be fun. I needed it to be alive. So it morphed into this. Art became a way to imagine different circumstances than I had. It became a way to play. It became a way to try on movement or strength or resilience in different ways. And it became a way to practice surrender and embrace process and journey. My work created a world where something strange and imperfect can exist, and it might still belong.